So it is Sunday, September 17th. I'm going to go through the week's events, the headlines. I'm going to help you understand what's happened over the course of the past week just by looking at the headlines that I've been looking at. Some may be useful, some may be not. Some may be things that you've never even heard or have slipped through the cracks. So if I roll back the clock to 10 September, RT article said that Biden aide intervenes to end rambling press conference. And that was a little unusual and something to keep your eye on because generally speaking, aides don't do that to cut off a president when he's kind of going off the rails. Lavrov said that the G20 was a success, and from his perspective, I'm sure it was. They got to water down that statement about Russia's hostility in Ukraine, saying nobody should be hostile to anyone anywhere, without pointing the finger at Russia. Brazil's Lula said that Putin can attend next year's G20 without fear of arrest. And he said, "What I can tell you is that if I'm Brazil's president, and if he comes to Brazil, he will not be arrested." Okay, Monday, 11 September. Okay, so German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock visited Kyiv on her fourth visit to Ukraine. Kim Jong-un was to visit Russia. He was not quite there yet. He was just starting his trip. He was taking an armored train to Russia, to Vladivostok. Vladivostok is the closest major city to the North Korean border. It is the only reason I know it is because of the game Risk, playing that as a child. But it's right on the Pacific Ocean, or the sea, I guess the Japanese Sea or Sea of Japan, but it's just above North Korea. Putin and Kim exchange rifles, which was an interesting metaphor. And Zelenskyy tells The Economist magazine that he is preparing for a long war. Now, he wasn't saying it will be a long war, but he and his planners are preparing as if it's a long war. And that's good that he's thinking in those kind of terms, like what will be needed down the line. If we can't conclude this first, how do we get this and that and the other thing? Putin's party wins majorities in the elections across Russia. This was no surprise to anyone, um, and including occupied Ukraine. Now, I did a video about this where I was talking about the election results and how much higher they were in Ukraine, in the four oblasts seized by Ukraine, than they were in Russia proper, by about 20 points each. And it's improbable to my mind that with less population, they're higher as a percentage of the population while they're occupied. Okay, 52.5% of Ukrainians believe that criticism of government for corruption neither destabilizes the country nor reduces partners' trust. So there's been a rash of um, arrests for corruption. Like, Zelensky's administration is really working on this kind of thing, trying to make sure that they're dealing with the corruption issue. Only 34% of respondents believe that during war, such criticism destabilizes the situation in the country and undermines the trust of partners. And I think that that minority view is it's correct, that that should be a minority view. I think that dealing with the corruption issues that have been plaguing them for many years is a proper thing for them to be doing right now. It's healthy. Russians fire on Ukrainian flat tied to if there was a Ukrainian flag. I actually I did a short video because I saw that article and I said, okay, I got to do this now. Just talking about this, and then I showed the picture a little later. So Russians fired on a Ukrainian flag tied to balloons, revealing their position in the counterattack. So it was the anniversary of one of the cities, like the 250th birthday. So they released this huge balloon with a dozen or 2 dozen helium balloons carrying it. And so it's up in the sky, and it went over Donetsk, and Russian soldiers, like waving meat in front of a stupid dog, started firing on the flag with the balloons, which revealed their positions, which then allowed Ukrainians to know where their firing positions were. And I mean, it was just like somebody put in the comment that this was the ultimate trolling ever. I think that's right. U.S. says that Russia targets Black Sea cargo ship with missiles. Now, four cargo ships have gone out since Russia has decided that they were no longer going to play nice in the Black Sea. The first one was from Hong Kong, and they were going to fire on a ship from Hong Kong, like they were going to tick off the Chinese. So that was smart. But Russia, quote, the Russian military targeted a civilian cargo ship in the Black Sea with multiple missiles last month, but they were successfully intercepted by Ukrainian forces, Britain said on September 11th, citing intelligence. That was the Liberian flagship. There were at least two Liberian flagships, and I was thinking, okay, well, that's clever. Maybe they don't want to fire on African ships because they're trying to get goodwill, but apparently they did. Another article, a young Crimean faces possible prison sentence for kicking the Russian flag because of Russia's invasion. So he's charged with desecrating the flag, which has become an offense to bring discredit on the flag since the war began. Quote, on September 8th, two Russian Telegram channels posted two videos with Malikov, that's his name. In the first of these, Malikov is asked to explain why he kicked the Russian flag. He explains, quote, because the Russian Federation invaded my country. What country? Ukraine. You're not in Ukraine now. You're in Sevastopol. Sevastopol is Ukraine, as is all of Crimea, was his response, which is pretty good. By the way, I said that wrong. As I understand, it's Sevastopol, not Sevastopol. And I'm using Anna Sevastopol. I'm using Anna from Ukraine's pronunciation. I figure that's probably the safest way to go. Okay, calls to defect. Ukrainian hotline rise 70% after the helicopter pilot defected. So that was fun. This helicopter pilot who defected last week, not this past week, but the week before, September 5th, he brought a helicopter to Ukraine full of parts of plane parts and just essentially gave it up. Now, he was paid $500,000 for that. Quote, on September 5th, the HUR announced that he would receive the hryvnia equivalent of 500,000 US dollars, approximately hryvnia 18.48 million, as a reward. Ukraine's parliament passed a law on April 22nd, 2022, offering up to $1 million to Russian military personnel who managed to transfer equipment to Ukraine, depending on the type of equipment they hand over. And so the calls to this hotline to surrender themselves has gone up significantly since. That's good. Zelenskyy tells The Economist again that he's preparing for a long war, and if you just Google that and listen to the interview, it's well worth listening to. Okay, Tuesday, 12 September 2023. Ukrainian troops have success near Robotyne on the southern front. They are chipping away at it. I'm probably going to do an entire video on just what's happening in the counteroffensive and why they've been able to be successful. Because what's happened is that the tactics there are different than the tactics that were originally set out. So there was a leadership problem, and that's something that I find very interesting. Ukraine recaptures Boyko rigs in the Black Sea. Now, when I first read this, I kind of went, good for them, but I kind of yawned, and I thought, okay, so they captured the rigs. Maybe it'll change hands a few times and go back and forth. But this was more important than I understood at the time, and you'll see why later. Pravda said that Putin suggested the USA should lift Ukraine's decree banning talks with Russia. Oh, yeah, so it's the U.S. keeping Ukraine from talking to Russia. Not that Zelenskyy is set like flint against Russia since the invasion. Quote, if the United States believes that Ukraine is ready for negotiation, then let Washington get Kyiv to cancel the decree that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy signed banning negotiations, Vladimir Putin said at the plenary session of the Eastern Economic Forum. Well, okay, but there's an assumption baked into that it's the U.S. driving that. Kim Jong-un arrived in Russia, and there were headlines like, can North Korea's ammunition offer Russia support in the Ukraine war? And let me quote from that. This is a Reuters article. North Korea is believed to have a large stockpile of artillery shells and rockets that would be compatible with Soviet-era weapons, as well as a history of producing such ammunition. The size of these stores and its degradation over time is less clear, as is the scale of ongoing production. But these stockpiles could help replenish those severely depleted in Ukraine. And again, that was from Reuters. RT had a headline that the G20 takeaways, a win for India and multilateralism. Again, India is all in. For some reason, India has polled very highly supportive of Russia. I think it was 62% of the population. Most other countries support Russia at about 12%. When I say most other countries, I'm talking about like Western European countries, not African countries. African countries could come up higher. Okay, quote from the article. Interestingly, while Russia and Chinese presidents haven't come here, the language of the declaration reflected their position to the extent that no country is criticized to the extent as it was in last year's declaration in Bali. Okay, and that's true. They watered down the language so that Russia wouldn't officially be criticized. We're just saying nobody should be aggressors against anyone. The G7 condemns sham elections in Russia on Ukrainian territory, and I covered that in the video last week. If you want to read that or watch that, I highly recommend it. Estonian mobile saunas are being sent to the front lines, and I thought, well, that's interesting. It sounds like a luxury, but it's really like if you've been on the front line and haven't been able to get yourself clean for weeks or months, this is a really useful thing. And the Estonians are like really big into saunas. And I don't mean just, I mean just these mobile baths that can get them clean, and so they're doing their part with what they have, and that's good stuff. Putin called Soviet invasion of Budapest and Prague a mistake, which I thought was an interesting headline. This was in Radio Free Europe. This wasn't in RT. Quote, we have long recognized that this element of Soviet policy was a mistake and led only to tensions in relations. So where's he going with that? So he also said, it's not right to do anything in foreign policy that harms the interest of other peoples, he said, quote, but it's exactly the rake that we're going to talk, if we're going to talk about rakes, that leading Western countries, and above all the United States, are stepping on. Wait, whoa, what? So it's not right to do anything in foreign policy that harms the interest of other peoples. So that's what the U.S. is doing to Russia, is what he's saying. Totally forgetting what he's doing to Ukraine, or totally ignoring that and saying that it's like the U.S. stepping on a rake that's coming up and hitting itself, because he's stepping on one end and it's right. I think he might be missing something. Okay, Sweden is considering sending Gripens, I think it's called Gripens, their planes to Ukraine. And I read an article about this about a month ago, maybe 3 weeks ago, that Gripens are a easier to handle type of plane that they can train on more quickly. Zelenskyy thanks Denmark for its 12th package of military assistance of $830 million. Now, we've only been in the war for 18, 19 months, something like that. So a 12th package. Good on you, Denmark. Okay, RT says Putin said that Trump's charges are political persecution. Well, Putin would know political persecution. Whether it is or isn't, this is his view of things. He said this, quote, the things that are happening to Trump are persecution of a political competitor. That's what it is, and that's done in full view of the U.S. public and the entire world, he said. So some Americans perceive it that way, but I thought it was interesting that Putin was saying that when Putin would certainly be an authority on this kind of thing. Elon Musk blocking Starlink. This was in the Military Times. And the Military Times was commenting on this and said, quote, if we're going to rely upon commercial architectures or commercial systems for operational use, then we have to have some assurances that they're going to be available. The Air Force Secretary Frank Kendall said, quote, we have to have that. Otherwise, they are a convenience and maybe an economy in peacetime, but they're not something that we can rely on in wartime, unquote. All right, Wednesday, 13 September 2023. Russia's launched over 2,000 Shahed drones since the war began. Now, they got these Shahed drones 1 year earlier, September 13th, 2022. That's when they first started using these Shahed drones, and they've launched 2,000 since then. That's like four a day, something like that, every day, four a day. So since the war began, or five a day, something like that. Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un hold secret tete-a-tete talks at the Cosmodome, according to Pravda. Quote, "We are confident that the Russian army and the people of the Russian Federation will certainly win a great victory in the sacred struggle to punish the congregation of evil that claims hegemony and nourishes expansionist illusions in the struggle to create a stable environment for development," says Kim. Wait a minute. He's calling the U.S. and their allies the congregation of evil. Look, I want you to listen to this quote one more time, recognizing that Russia is doing the very things that he's talking about. He says, "We're confident that the Russian army and the people of the Russian Federation will," now listen to this, Russia's doing these very things, "will certainly win a great victory in the sacred struggle to punish the congregation of evil that claims hegemony and nourishes expansionist illusions." Doesn't Russia claim hegemony over Ukraine and nourish expansionist illusions in a struggle to create a stable environment for development? I mean, you can't make this stuff up. Okay, Russia shows Kim some hypersonic missiles, and Kim's very interested in this kind of thing. Kim is an interesting character. He's okay with starving his country as long as he lives well and he can nourish his nuclear program. I watched a video last night about the Kim regime. It was called Dollar Heroes. You can find it on YouTube. Somebody pointed this out to me, sent me an email, and mentioned it to me, and I thought, wow, that's interesting. I the North Korean regime is really perverse in the way that it treats its people like dogs, and essentially sending them out as work slaves, and lining the pockets of both the Kim regime and paying for their nuclear ambitions. It's something to watch. Okay, the Vashchny Cosmodrome is the remote Russian spaceport that was hosting Kim and Putin's talks, and so I guess Putin was selecting a location that would be impressive to the Kim regime. Putin embraces his role as a spoiler with Kim. Yeah, he knows he's an outlier. He can't play in the Western sandbox anymore, and so he's courting the global South, particularly Africa as well as North Korea. And so that's leading him to become weirdly. I did a video yesterday I called Desperation. I said desperation in large letters, and it was about what was happening in Cuba, where they were taking these Cubans and saying, yeah, you're going to come rebuild and it'll be, good money and whatever. And they're sent to the front. And like, they're really desperate. And I'll show you something else with desperation a little bit later about like how this ties to Kim. Zelenskyy dismisses state commissioner for AMCU. So, quote, Zelenskyy has dismissed Serhiy Tushkisk from the post of state commissioner of the Anti-Monopoly Committee of Ukraine. So this is another perhaps corruption issue, but I don't know. I mean, not everything that people are dismissed for is corruption, and the article didn't really go into it, but they are working on that kind of thing. RT Polidak said that India and China have low intellectual potential. Okay, Polidak might have just been a little bit hot, but the quote was this: "The problem with these countries is that they do not analyze the consequence of their own moves. These countries, unfortunately, have low intellectual potential." And now he's talking about India and China, that they're not thinking through, like, what happens if Russia wins here, right? Like, is this a good thing? Is this a healthy thing? Like, you got to think beyond the oil and gas deals, the sweetheart deals that you're getting from China here. Think through the global implications. But calling names wasn't really necessarily Smart thing to do, but I get it. And if I was him, I'd be very hot too. I understand. Ukraine has been breaking through the Russian lines, according to an article in The Guardian, and they really have. I'm looking at a deep state map, and like they're making progress. It's very slow in on the ground. They're making progress though. Latvia, Estonia ban entry for vehicles with Russian registration. So the Baltics, man, they're in Ukraine's corner, and Latvia and Estonia are about a little over 1 million each, and Lithuania is the third in the Baltics. That's about the size of both Latvia and Estonia in population. None of those countries want Russia to be there. Like, look, Russia took them over in World War II, and or after World War II rather, and they don't want to go back to that kind of experience, and they're very stalwart in Ukraine's defense. Ukraine confirms that it hit a landing ship and a submarine. Now, this was the big news and this week, and it really was big news. This was a fantastic operation, but I didn't realize how it was prepared. So that gas rig that was taken over, knocking off some radar or some early warning systems, and another what was a Triumph system or something that was taken before that. Some of these radar systems were taken out, which was allowing things to get through. The Crimean shipyard is on fire after a Ukrainian attack. 2 ships damaged and irreparably damaged. We didn't know it at the time. 24 people injured in these Storm Shadow missile attack. Okay, Thursday, 14 September, Kolomoisky faces new corruption charges. Now, Kolomoisky was the oligarch that kind of helped Zelenskyy come to power, not directly, but as come to become a prominent comedian and producer, and Zelenskyy parlayed that into coming to power. A Triumph was destroyed near Yesperia, and this is a big thing. This was on Thursday. Like, it was overshadowed by all the news about the previous day's events with, hitting the sub and the landing ship. But this Triumph system is worth, it's an air defense system, it's worth $1.2 billion. So it was a bad week for Russia. In fact, that should be the title. Maybe I'll do that. This is a good title for this would be a bad week for Russia. Triumph was destroyed. Pravda says that Ukraine loses 500,000 soldiers since February 2022. I did an entire video on this because it was so nuts. Like, they can say whatever they want, but it doesn't make it so. And I unpacked just why this was ridiculous and wrong. Ukrainian pilots test Swedish Gripen jets, and I think that Gripens will be on their way as soon as the Swedes can backfill. But the Swedes still aren't full NATO members, I don't believe, and they're being very, very careful. Putin gratefully accepts Kim's invite to North Korea, and I did a video about Putin and Kim. It's called Bros, and the way that they reported from Russia on North Korea, on North Korea dictator Kim's visit. And it was bizarre because they didn't report on any like real facts. They talked about the menu. They talked about how Kim marveled at Russian cars. They talked about, like, oh, that was the one where Shogu was doing, like, are you going to win? And he's like, well, what choice do we have? Like, that's not exactly what you want to hear from the leader of your military if you're Russian, right? So it was a really bizarre video that was where that came from. Okay. Lukashenko puts forward an Axis plan of a 3-way partnership between Belarus, Russia, and North Korea. I mean, if you want a worse crowd, I mean, it's hard. I mean, I would imagine Iran can assemble one, but wow. Okay, so Lukashenko's 3-way partnership plan was out there, and that's just like, if your mom told you, like, I don't want you hanging out with these kids because who you hang out with is who you are, well, there we are. Okay, Pentagon chief will hold the 15th Ramstein format meeting of the contact group. So again, the 15th Ramstein meeting in about 19 months of the war. Quote, the secretary and the chairman will join ministers of defense and senior military officials from nearly 15 nations to discuss the ongoing crisis in Ukraine and the continued close coordination by the international community to provide the Ukrainian people with the means necessary to defend their sovereignty. Next, Zelenskyy will travel to New York for the UN speech to court the rest of the world. And that's right. This was a political article. Um, that's right. When Zelensky goes to the UN, he'll not only make the speech, but he's going to be really spending time with those on the fence, particularly those in the global south, South America, maybe Africa, but countries that are leaning a little bit maybe toward Russia. Like, look, what are you doing? Come, like, support. We need your support. If this can happen to us, something can happen to you. Um, like, not obviously Russia is going to be attacking, you know, southern whatever, but you he's got to reach out, and he's going to do that. He'll be doing a lot of retail politics while he's there. Retail politics is the shaking hands, kissing babies, getting one-to-one connection as opposed to just mailing out stuff. New lessons the U.S. is learning from the air war over Ukraine. It's really interesting. It's not that just the U.S. This was an article that was talking about how, like, our military is really paying attention to how the fighting's going in Ukraine, but so are militaries all over the world if they're worth their salt. If you're not paying attention, you're stupid, because the next war will change significantly based on what they've innovated here. Russia's southern mistake, the Surovikin lines and Gerasimov tactics. I'm pretty sure I'm going to do a video on this. If it's not the next one, it'll be tomorrow. It's coming soon. Because what happened is there's a change in leadership, and with the change of leadership came a change in the way that they did things, and this is actually helping Ukraine. Okay, why has Ukraine stepped up attacks on occupied Crimea? I might actually even use another article about this when I'm talking about that Surovikin lines and Gerasimov tactics, because Ukraine has really stepped up attacks on occupied Crimea. It has both strategic and symbolic value, but I think that it's more than that even, and they're connected. Crimea is connected to taking the southern front. Like, take Crimea out of the picture, what we see as the southern front, where they're making some progress. If they can take Crimea, one helps the other either way, right? Okay, new drone tech could make it easier to clear unexploded bombs. I was even thinking about doing a video about that. I just don't know if I'm going to do it. Okay, Friday, Zelenskyy meets with the ICC prosecutor, Carmen Khan. Quote, the cooperation of our state, all our law enforcement institutions, the Prosecutor General's office with the International Criminal Court is absolutely systematic and brings closer real responsibility for Russian war crimes. Already the first clear result of historic arrest warrant for Putin. There will be other fair results, Zelenskyy said on Telegram. Now, there was another article here from Interfax, Ukraine. Ukraine's goal before the 2024 NATO summit in Washington is to show real progress in implementing annual national program, says Stefishana. Okay, so they're trying to show that they're ready to integrate into NATO, but they're also trying to show real progress, that they're making measurable results in the counteroffensive, and not just on the ground, but that's why the drone strikes into Russia, the hundreds of drone strikes into Russia over the last year, and that's why the Black Sea is being attacked and everything else. Third, separate air assault brigade liberates Androvika, which is a little place just below Bakhmut. I actually remembered the name of the city because the Russians squawked about it so much when they took Androvika. Wagner fighting around Bakhmut at the time. Quote, as a result of lightning-fast operation, the Russian garrison of Androvika was surrounded, cut off from the main forces, and destroyed. In 2 days, the 3rd Separate Assault Brigade eliminated the head of the enemy's brigade reconnaissance, 3 battalion commanders, almost the entire infantry, and the 72nd Brigade, along with officers and a significant amount of equipment, they said in the Telegram channel. Okay, Zelensky's plan to visit Washington as well while he's coming to the United States to the UN meeting in New York. He's going to go visit Washington as Congress debates another $24 billion aid package. Okay, he really needs to shore up support, particularly with those on the fence in the U.S. Congress. So, with Republican support being split between those that are like very Trumpian and like, why should we be giving money over there? I don't think it'll be that much of an issue if Ukraine can really show some results just before that. So just before the visit, I think you're going to see some more impressive strikes than what we saw before. Um, I got to give the same analogy. I was at a football game yesterday, and while I'm watching the game, I mean, like we scored once, and they scored many more times than we did, and it was very, very hard to get the fans, at least on our side, excited about the game because it was just as you're losing, you just like cheerleaders can have the greatest cheers ever, but while you're losing, you don't feel like cheering, and that's kind of the scenario here. So I'm thinking that while Zelenskyy goes to New York and Washington, you're going to see some spectacular, um, interesting attacks on Russian positions that you hadn't seen before. I don't mean on the ground game. I mean probably in the Baltic Sea or into Russia or whatever else. Okay, Mariupol residents whose apartments were destroyed are left homeless as new buildings are sold to Russians. Way to keep it classy, Russia. So when their homes are destroyed, they're displaced. The Russian authorities that are over Mariupol, occupied Mariupol, are sorry. I mean, you're going to have to move out here, and they're selling the prime real estate to developers who are selling it and giving it to Russians, and not giving it, but selling it to Russians. And so, the more that I look, somebody emailed me yesterday and said, what they see in Russia is feudalism, and there's something very true to thinking about it in like a feudalistic kind of way. But I think the better analogy is the mob, like the mafia, like the way that they handle things is it's like they run a state that's the mafia. It's really interesting to watch. Okay, RT, new charges against ex-Zelensky sponsor Igor Kolomoisky, and this was the same thing that we saw before from his defrauding Pravita Bank. So there's new charges about that, but it's nothing really new in that. Okay, Saturday, September 16th. This is the last day. Today is Sunday, the 17th, as I'm recording this now. New mobilization, last thing Kremlin wants ahead of the presidential election, right? They don't want, I don't think. Now, I know some people are saying there's a new mobilization coming, it has to come. I think they're trying to do it as quietly as possible, and they're trying to do it digitally. They're trying to not, raise alarms or say we're going to raise this huge number so that people flee the country. They're trying to not do that. It's the last thing that they want ahead of a presidential election. U.S. supplies, and I thought this was great, industrial size 3D printers for spare parts for military equipment. And if they can do that, man, they can keep supplying themselves. Now they got to make sure that they're very quiet about where those are, because those are expensive and they don't want them hit. But yeah, that's right. And let them build their own stuff. The more that they can build their own things, the better off they'll be. RT says Ukrainian conscription officer reveals a high casualty rate. I might even do a video about this. They said only 10 to 20% of those drafted in the Poltava region are still fighting, this conscription officer said. Now, the article made it sound like that's happened to the entire army, but if it is true, and that would be very terrible, but if it is true, that's to an isolated place, not to the whole Ukrainian army, but it's carried in RT with a twist. Another RT article, Zelenskyy rival MP Nestor Sefrich is charged with treason for spreading pro-Russian sentiments. Okay, I mean, this kind of thing happens. I'm not sure that there's much more to see there. Kim Jong-un inspects a nuclear-capable aircraft during visit. This is the kind of thing that Un wants, and so he's willing to trade old, dumb artillery pieces and artillery shells for nuclear capable aircraft. Look at me, I'm nuclear capable, and now the West has to listen to me. And that's the way that Ung thinks. All right, Ukraine's Crimea attacks are seen as a key to a counteroffensive against Russia. And yeah, I think this is what I was talking about earlier, where like one thing supports another. This may roll into another video, this particular article from the BBC, because to the degree that they can stifle Crimea, it makes their southern front better. To the degree that they can make it an advance on the southern front, it makes the ability to attack Crimea better. And So yeah, I think that this is really important. Another article, Milley says he's skeptical North Korean arms will make a big difference. And there is a quote in there, quote, what we are seeing right now is Russia in quite a desperate mode and seeking support from North Korea. And I talked about that in that video yesterday about desperation with the Cubans. Like, like who would have thought in January of 2022 that 20 months later, Russia would be like, please, Kim Jong-il, or Un, not Il, Il was his father. Please, Kim Jong-un, please give me some weapons so that I can continue to fight against Ukraine over there. Like Ukraine, you're a fraction of the size, fraction of the population, fraction of the war power, fraction of the economy, and you're still embroiled with them, and you're uh, lying to Cubans and drafting them into your front lines, and you're appealing to Kim Jong-un for help. Like that's pretty desperate at this point. Okay. So yeah, providing any type of ammunition would further continue the war, unquote. Okay, that was in the Hill. And then finally, last article, Kyiv presses offensive in the south and east and thanks allies for support packages. And there's a quote here as well. Russian media outlet RBC said in late August that it had tallied more than 500 claims by Russian authorities of drone attacks inside Russia since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine began 18 months ago. In 110 cases, casualties or damage were reported. So I don't know if it's 500 claims. It could be more because maybe they're not saying it, but I don't think that's it. It could be less because maybe they're, uh, saying that something happened that didn't happen. But it doesn't seem like that's going to be happening a lot either. So let's say that 500 is a legitimate figure. That's a lot. 500 in I mean, it's only been about so many days, right? I mean, it's been more than that, like 560, 570 days now, something like that. But that's a lot of attacks inside Russia's uh, internationally recognized geographical borders. So, okay, that's all. That covers the news for the week. I know that was a lot, but hopefully that gave you some extra context. I want to say thank you for listening to me. Thank you for caffeinating me by supplying me with coffee. Thank you for the likes and the shares and the subscribes. And thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.